Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Lifestyle Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Justin Jackson, who's a co-founder of Transistor.fm, which is a podcast hosting and analytics company. They do podcast hosting for folks like Basecamp, Indie Hackers, and others. And Justin is the founder of Megamaker and writer of Marketing for Devs. He was earlier the product manager of Mailout Interactive. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Awesome.
These are my favorite type of shows.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, really happy to have you here. I want to know, how did you get interested to get work in startups?
Startups. Well, I've been interested in computers my whole life. I was born in the 80s and got my dad brought home a Commodore VIC-20 probably in 85. And I was very interested in that, just learning how to use a computer. I liked that you could make it do things. I liked that you could make it interactive. So I've been interested in technology for a long time. And then I had a little bit of a hiatus. I went to school for business and then got married pretty early, and we had a child pretty early. And so I needed to get a job. So I got a job out of business school. And then in 2008, and didn't really work in tech for a long time. Worked in retail, worked in nonprofits. And then in 2008, I wanted to make a career change. And I applied for a bunch of different jobs. I applied for some sales jobs. I applied different places. But then a founder of a startup in Edmonton, Alberta, contacted me and said he wanted to hire me. And I don't think he exactly knew what I would do for him, but that was how I got introduced to tech startups. I went and worked at Mailout Interactive in 2008. I think my first week on the job, he gave me a copy of Getting Real by 37 Signals, which was just this free PDF book. It's still free. You can still get it. And I remember reading that and it just blew my mind. Like I was instantly enthralled with this idea of running a business like that. And I had my own businesses in the past. I owned a couple snowboard shops. I had little businesses when I was in high school. In college, I did web design and wedding videos. And so getting to see how the software business worked and how tech worked, and especially how much leverage a small indie company could have, was really appealing to me. So I read that Basecamp book in a day, and kind of at that moment, I knew I wanted to start another company, and really I wanted to bootstrap my own software company.
Absolutely, I think Basecamp is one of the best bootstrap companies in the world, and and you've done a lot of side projects, and you've been into into podcasting since I think 2012. But what got you really interested into podcasting?
Oh, I mean, this is what's so interesting about life, is the actions we take, they're usually not the result of just like one thing. They're the result of a sequence of things, a culmination of a bunch of things. And I've always been into radio. When I was a kid, I used to, driving around with my dad I grew up in this little farm town in Alberta. So he had a pickup truck and we listened to talk radio. There's CBC radio here in Canada. And also there was just 630 CHED talk radio. And I really loved talk radio. I wanted to, sometimes I would turn off the radio and I would pretend I was the host asking a guest questions. So the idea of having a radio program or a talk radio show was always there. And I think I would have even gone into radio if it just it looks so hard. Like you had to really kind of commit yourself to it. And the money wasn't that good and there was no guarantees. So when podcasts came around, I would listen to podcasts. Like I listened to Dignation quite a bit on the bus. And the idea of starting one was really appealing. but I never acted on it until my friend Kyle Fox invited me to, well, he just reached out to me one day and he said, hey, we're both product managers. We're both into product. Why don't we start a podcast where we talk about product? And that was in 2012. And that was it. Once I've been podcasting ever since then. And I would say it's probably a tie between blogging and podcasting, but those two things together have had a massive impact on me, my career, and where I am today. They're just almost every opportunity I've had, almost every career jump, almost everything really has come through either podcasting or blogging.
I think that's very interesting, and I would say podcasting is one of the best things I did. It's like a cheat code to meet some very interesting people. As I
Yeah,
mentioned,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Especially, I mean, it's a little bit more competitive now, but the it is gratifying to have someone reach out and say, "Hey, do you want to be on my show?" And normally to get uh, access to some of these folks is just impossible. But a lot of people and a lot of a lot of folks who have had some success, they really like this format, and so getting them on the line and on a microphone isn't as hard as saying, can we grab coffee, or can I get a minute of your time, or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of a cheat code, like you said, for getting a hold of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've done a lot of other side projects, but how did the start for Transistor happen?
So again, it's kind of a culmination of a bunch of things. So starting that podcast in 2012, 2014, I went to XOXO Festival in Portland, and my friend Chase introduced me to his friend John Buddha, and John at the time had just built the first version of Simplecast, and he was looking for people to review it. He was looking for people to submit it to Product Hunt. And so I said, oh, I'll help you out. And so I switched my podcast over to him, and I gave him a bunch of feedback, helped him promote it a bit. And then we just kept hanging out every year. Our life changed. He ended up leaving Simplecast and going and working for Cards Against Humanity. I was doing my own projects. But then near the end of 2017, we were both in our late 30s. We were both looking for a new project, and we both liked working together. We'd done a few things together already, and thought he was building another podcasting platform. And I just had always been a part of podcasting. And I noticed that it was ascendant. Like there were more people podcasting. There was more companies that were starting shows. There's a op-ed in the New York Times every week about podcasting, and the timing seemed right. It felt like the wave was building, and so I begged him to let me be a part of Transistor, and he thought about it for a while, and then eventually came back and said, "Yeah, let's do this together, but let's do it right." So we went and signed partnership agreements, got it all done properly with a lawyer. And yeah, I became a 50% stakeholder in Transistor Inc. And from that moment on, we just started working together on the side, opened up early access in February, March, and then launched officially August 2018.
That's very interesting. And how did you find your first few customers for Transistor?
This is why it's helpful to have been doing all that other stuff before. So, on John's side, he'd been in the Chicago tech scene for a long time, knew a lot of podcasters from working at Cards Against Humanity. Cards had a bunch of podcast studios in their office. And so he had a bunch of connections. And that's how we got some of our first customers. And then I had been building an audience for basically since I launched the podcast. So I had a group of people who knew me and who knew about me and were interested in what I was going to do next. And so I'd say, a good 75% of our initial customers came from my audience, came from this little community for bootstrappers I've been running called Megamaker. And all of the things I did in the past, all of those connections we built ended up being, probably our first 100, 200, 300 customers.
Got it. And I think when you started in 2018, you were able to, reach a MRR of around 30,000. But just wanted to understand, what's your current MRR and what's the, CAC to LTV ratio? How do you look at the metrics for your company?
Sure. So we were sharing our revenue publicly for the first bit up until we hit 30,000 MRR. And when was that? That was, so we hit 30,000 just after September 2019. And then we stopped sharing our revenue numbers publicly. I can't give you exact numbers, but I can tell you that it's over, in terms of annual revenue, we're doing over 7 figures every year. And we have thousands of customers, 5,000 customers probably, and serve over 14,000 podcasts on the platform. I think in terms of valuation, that's a hard one. We're the biggest thing about Transistor, we're a small company. Like as of this recording, it's still just John and I as full-time employees. We're just hiring a full-time customer success person right now. And so it's there's lots of margin. There's lots of financial margin. There's lots of time margin. It's an enjoyable job. Like every day we show up and we get to work together. John and I have become even better friends. If either of us needs to take a day or a week off, we can. There's no requirement that, I clock in at 9 a.m. and leave at 6 or whatever. So in terms of valuation, when people have come by and asked us, are you interested in being acquired or investment? We always say no. We've always said no, because there's just nothing. Like they could offer us money, but at this point, even a $1 million investment wouldn't really help us. Like we have enough profit that we can continue to invest in the business on our own. And, personally, as founders, we have, a comfortable living. Like for the first time in my life, I've been able to pay off debt. I've been able to help my daughter go to college. And so it would have to be a pretty big number. And even then, John and I would have to consider whether we wanted to go and work for another company and have golden handcuffs for 3, 4, 5 years. Right now, we're just really enjoying the work, and it feels like any offer would have to kind of compete with that. So how do you value a company like that? I don't know. There's so much more to a company's valuation than money, right? Like what kind of life am I going to have if I have to go work for whoever, IBM or Salesforce or whatever? Is that going to be a good life for me? Am I going to enjoy that? So I'm not saying we'd never sell the company, because you can't run a company forever. And there's definitely some existential threats in the podcast industry, but overall, It's been incredibly gratifying, and we are really thankful to be in a good place right now and to not be desperate for investment, desperate for debt financing, or desperate for a acquisition.
Right. And I think you made a couple of great points. And I had I wanted to know, should somebody start a company looking into having an exit strategy, or should they start something small and see, where they're going from there? Does it really matter if you try to build a forever company or have an exit strategy in mind?
I mean, I think it's difficult to build for an exit. Uh, Everything's a risk. Like, you're always making a bet. But betting on an exit and a good exit is kind of like, I don't know what the poker equivalent would be, but it's kind of like you're betting everything on one possible outcome. I think what's better to do, what is important, is as you evaluate the things you're interested in, you also want to evaluate them from the perspective of how much pull there is in the market for what you're thinking about building. So, how do you know that people want this and are going to buy this? And having to answer that question, like, how do you know? How do you know that there's people that out there looking for this right now? Uh, you have to go, like, are they searching on Google for this right now? Are they asking people for recommendations on Twitter? Are they going to conferences and trade shows actively seeking a solution like this? That's the important piece. And software specifically is really a volume game. It works on volume. Everything from traffic, like you need, even for a small little indie software company, you need thousands of people visiting your website every month. And from those thousands of visitors, you need, in our case, we need hundreds and hundreds of trials every month, people trying it out. And we are credit card up front. So people putting in their credit card, trying it free for 14 days. And then you need to convert a fair number of those. And if there's no existing momentum, if there's not people already actively in motion trying to seek out a solution like you're offering, it's going to be very difficult. So I would build for market momentum before I would build for an exit. And the more evidence you can find, the more demonstrated demand you can see, the easier it is to build the company and really have a good life. Like, people start businesses, they're taking this enormous risk because they want to have a better life. And too often I see people sacrificing that better life for lofty ideas that aren't actually helpful. You want to go after something that's going to give you the life you want. You want to go after the opportunities that are going to give you the life you want. And so at least articulate, what do you want? It doesn't have to be what you're going to be committed to forever, but for me, I wanted freedom, flexibility, margin, both in terms of my time, my energy, everything. And I'm in my late 30s, and I'd had a couple businesses that had done okay, but not great. And so I kind of needed some payback money for all those years I'd invested as an entrepreneur before that hadn't really panned out the way I wanted to. And so that's what I wanted. And then I needed to find a market, a product category that could offer me at least that, right?
Right.
So podcasting is not massive. It's pretty small, actually. Like, the biggest competitor in paid podcast hosting probably has 80,000, 85,000 podcasts on the platform. So that's not a massive number, but it's a big enough category that we were able to carve out a little bit of space for us and be competitive. And so far, it's worked out okay.
Interesting. And market can be very important with what kind of lifestyle you choose, and what the final outcome you have.
Mhm.
For listeners who are first stage on entrepreneurs, what advice would you give on how to choose a market, and how do you validate your product?
Yeah. So for me, it's kind of like surfing. Um, in order for surfers to catch good waves, they have to do a lot of things. First, you got to learn to surf. Second, you've got to practice a ton. You've got to build up those muscles. You've got to spend lots of time paddling. Most of surfing is just paddling. You've got to show up, every day, every week, paddle in the water, looking at waves, learn to recognize and observe the shape of good waves. And to me, good waves are a metaphor for good business opportunities or good market opportunities. And so, yeah, for new entrepreneurs, make sure you've put in the time. Like, podcasting was a natural place for John and I to go because we both had experience in it. We had connections here. We had some unfair advantages. We had, I had been a podcaster since 2012. I knew tons of podcasters. So finding our initial customers wasn't difficult because I just had to convince people who were already in motion, who I already had a relationship with, to switch to our platform. But it takes time to build up all that stuff. And it doesn't have to take you as much time. It kind of happened slow for me over decades. And sometimes it takes decades. But I think if you were in your early 20s, there's some great examples of incredible entrepreneurs like Nathan Barry, who in their very early 20s just started swimming in the water, started practicing, started showing up, and were able to observe opportunities, these kind of approaching waves. In his case, it was email newsletters for creators. And at a very young age was able to swim out and start getting in motion, building something. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the key. And finding good opportunities in good categories takes some experimentation. It takes, time. It just takes time. Getting out of your bubble, being interested in a bunch of different things, having friendships and connections with a bunch of different people, going and working for somebody else, seeing what that's like, and building some stuff on your own. I think the other characteristic of successful entrepreneurs is they're always in motion. So even if that new side project you're working on isn't going to be $1 million idea, just working on it, being in motion, putting something out in public, building something will expose you to new ideas, new markets, new opportunities.
Right. And uh, would you suggest entrepreneurs to bootstrap a project on the side? I think, uh, as you mentioned that you have had opportunities when you're doing something, and
Mm-hmm.
that's when all these transitions have happened. But would you advise entrepreneurs to quit their jobs and go full on onto the projects, or should they bootstrap it on the side?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably an individual choice. For me, it was never an option because um, we had children quite young. And
Right.
so by the time I was 28, we already had 4 kids. And just quitting cold turkey wasn't an option. Now, my oldest is 18,
Oh,
and they could at this point in their life they have no dependents. Their costs are very low for them to, not have a job for a while and just work on some side projects might not be a bad idea. So it probably depends on what your context is. Uh, I think you definitely, when you're younger, you want to optimize for learning as much as you can, and then experiment with earning. Uh, and then, yeah, but starting on the side is usually the best bet for most people, unless you've raised some funding. And I used to be pretty opposed to raising funding, but there was a time when early on when we were building Transistor, bootstrapping it, self-funding it, that were very difficult financially. And I think reducing your risk of becoming broke or burnout is not a bad idea. If you can hold on and not get investment, I think that is better because you just own more of the company. There's less pressure to go big, all that stuff. But there's some great new funds now like Earnest Capital and Tiny Seed that will give you, 100 to 300,000. And their expectation isn't that you become a $1 billion unicorn. They're much more reasonable. And so I think it's okay to raise a bit of money if the terms are okay. And if you can raise a bit of money and, quit your job and work full time on your project, that might be a good way to go as well. Derek Sivers has this great blog post called Switch Careers Like Tarzan.
Yeah.
And the basic idea is that, when you're swinging from vine to vine, you make sure that you've got a hold of the new vine before you let go of the old vine. And I think that's a good principle for building companies. So whether it's building it on the side and waiting till it's kind of built up enough revenue for you to quit your job, or whether it's raising 100 or 200K and then quitting your job once that's in the bank so that you can build your product full time. Just make sure there's something there. You don't want to risk so much that you're swinging from the old vine, just hoping that you can catch the new vine. It makes sense to not take that much of a risk when you're trying to build something.
No, I think that's a great analogy to switch careers like Tarzan. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great post. I really like Derek Sivers stuff. It kind of grounds me when I read it. It feels like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Just good common sense.
Right, and you mentioned that you were opposed to raising funds initially, but but with the kind of funding which is happening, especially in Southeast Asia and US, where you read posts about lot of people raising a lot of capital, and younger generation would feel that it's maybe cooler to raise funding and all. Any suggestions on how does an entrepreneur decide what is right for him, or is he right for that business, and should he raise funding for his business?
Well, I will tell you, I've had 2 phone calls this week with people who started companies around the same time I did, and they both raised money. And what they've both said to me is, raising money definitely puts more pressure on you as the founder.
Right.
And you'd think it would be the opposite, but especially with traditional venture capital, they're not putting $1 million into your company because they want to get 2 million back. They're putting $1 million in your company because they want to get 100 million back. And that means that there's going to be an expectation for you to really grow fast. Transistor is in the single digit millions of revenue every year. And just getting there is challenging enough. But if I had someone breathing down my neck saying, this can't be that, you have to be doing $500 million a year, that I can't imagine the pressure. And it would take all the fun out of running a company. You're kind of doing a deal with the devil, where you're going to, instead of having the freedom you want, this is why I think really identifying what you want is important. If you do just want to, shoot for the stars and, you're going to swing hard or go home, like, that's fine. But make sure you're identifying what you want. If what you're looking for is freedom, purpose, financial margin, a good life, a creative life, working with people you enjoy, a sustainable pace of living, then don't raise venture capital. It's just that's as probably succinct of that's probably the best way to put it, right? So yeah, you have to be clear about what you want, and then make sure whatever avenue you choose aligns with that purpose. And for me, I've just, again, maybe it's because I had kids young, but the idea of just betting the farm or, swinging for the fences, and if it's not a home run, then I'm going home, never appealed to me. I just wanted a good life. I wanted to be able to go snowboarding when I want to go snowboarding, go for a bike ride, go to the beach. I didn't want that pressure, and so it didn't make sense for me.
Right. I think setting your values and deciding what sort of lifestyle you need is very important. And a lot of, I think, younger people, they might read on TechCrunch on their friends or somebody raising a lot of funding, and they might think that's the right way to live life. But I think if you decide on your values, I think that's important. And
by the way, can I one thing is I'm fairly certain that John and I are paying ourselves more than my friends who have raised venture capital. So I think there's also this idea that if you raise money, that it's kind of it's better for you financially as the founder. And I don't know if that's true. Now, the payouts could be bigger if you sell. And some sort of liquidity event, especially for a funded startup, is kind of the end game. Like, you want to be acquired by somebody big, and there's a handful of those companies, or you want to go public. And yeah, if you build a massive unicorn, the payouts for those can be quite good. But everything for the rest of us, the 99.9% of us, if you just want to make a good salary, it probably makes more sense to bootstrap, find a product category that has enough demand and enough volume that you can build it up and keep the company small and earn a comfortable living that way. Otherwise, like the people I know who have raised money, they have a board who kind of set salaries, or they feel guilty about paying themselves too much because they've taken money. So it doesn't really give you that financial freedom that you might be looking for.
Right. And Justin, you've been podcasting for almost a decade now, and I'm pretty regular in my content cadence. But what advice would you give me on how do you promote a podcast? What's the best strategy on content distribution and promotion?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the best way to start a podcast is if you have an existing audience. Because and if you look at the top podcasts, this is very true, right? So Joe Rogan really was able to take his TV popularity and put that into the podcast. Conan O'Brien has a big podcast. He was able to do that. Mark Maron was basically an unknown, but he knew a bunch of famous people, and he was able to interview them and grow the podcast that way. I think that technique is actually open to a lot of podcasters, right? You can still interview people that have bigger audiences than you and get them to share the show. That's what I did when I got started. I interviewed, people who had big audiences in the product space. And one trick I actually did is, even when my listenership was small, I polled my listeners. So I sent them a survey and I said, here's 5 people that I'd like to talk to. Who do you want to hear from the most? And they would vote. And whoever the top pick was, I would take a screenshot of the results, and then I would send it to them saying, you are the person my audience wants to hear from the most. 89% of my audience wants to hear from you next on the podcast. Can we arrange a meeting? And so I use that little trick to as a way of getting an introduction to people and showing them just how much the listeners want to hear from them. I think having a trailer episode is really important. A lot of people don't have a trailer, just a short 1 or 2 minute, well-produced commercial basically for your show. Apple Podcasts and Spotify will show your trailer usually at the top of your podcast listing. Optimizing your podcast title for search. So having some keywords in there that people might be searching for. So if you're a podcast about startups, it helps to have the word startups in your title. The search algorithms for Spotify and Apple specifically are not very sophisticated. They basically just search for keywords in the show title. What else? I think if you have an email list, let your email list know about your podcast when you publish a new episode. Create transcripts. I actually have been doing all my editing in a tool called Descript.
Yeah.
So you just drag audio into it. It creates a transcription automatically, and you can use that transcription in a blog post or, different places. It also allows you to export little audiograms. So you've seen these where, the words are highlighted and it's kind of animated. It's a way of creating an animated audio video, and you can share those on LinkedIn, on Facebook, YouTube. So I think having a process where you create a bunch of these assets every time you release a new episode is really helpful. And then just sharing it everywhere. Just always be sharing it. A couple directories people miss are podchaser.com and podacy.com. Those are the home of really avid podcast listeners. And so you can rate and review and discuss episodes on there and engage with this group of people who listen to a lot of shows and, like discussing the latest episodes they've just heard. So yeah, there's definitely a few things you can do. You don't need to have a massive audience to start a podcast. There's other ways of kind of leveraging what you do. And I think actually recording video like we're doing right now in Zoom is another big one. You can get the video and then you can create little video clips and tweet those out. Our second most popular episode of the show I do with John is an interview we did with Jason Fried, but we recorded the video and then I shared the video on Twitter, and it has, I think, 30, 40, 50,000 views or something. And that drove a lot of interest to the podcast because people wanted to hear the rest of the story, right? So using video clips, don't publish the whole thing to YouTube. I think that's unnecessary, but definitely really kind of spicy clips from the show that you can share, I think can really help with promotion.
I think you've put in a lot of golden nuggets. I really liked, doing the survey and trailer episode and, transcripts. I've been also using Descript, which is started by Andrew Mason. I think that's a great product. And since I was part of the On Deck Fellowship, I think Descript was very popular over there as well.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and you said podcasting is very small, but there's a lot of talk about Joe Rogan getting big deal from Spotify, which is around, I think, $500 million. But do you think podcasting can be really big in future, or do you think we see that just betting on a small market for now?
Yeah, I think the Joe Rogan deal was 100 million.
Yeah.
Podcasting in terms of venture scale is still small. I just wrote a piece on this called Podcasts and Capital. And I'm actually confused why venture capitalists are putting so much money into it, because it just does not have the traditional characteristics of venture scale exits, or even like the number of participants necessary to get to a certain kind of level. So podcasting has been growing very slow and steady. If you look at the chart since 2008, it's like we add between 5, 10, 15, 16. The biggest year it grew was 23%. But, it's very gradual growth. There's no hockey stick in podcasting. And I like it. It's a gradual growth curve. It's sustainable. It shows that podcasting isn't a flash in the pan. The listeners that we have right now are committed listeners. They're not going to abandon podcasting for TikTok or Snapchat or whatever the flavor of the month is. And the deals that Spotify is doing, we'll have to see if they pan out. I could be wrong, but they seem too big for podcasting. It's YouTube ran a similar playbook when it started. It was, trying to get creators to come onto their platform from other places like iFilm and Atom Films, and they were paying these, nice, juicy, exclusive contracts for people to post their content on YouTube. And it worked out for them. But YouTube and video is massive. It's just a much, much bigger market than audio will ever be. And I'm not convinced that all that capital is good for podcasting. And I'm not even convinced that, like, the exits we've had so far, Megaphone was, I think, 200 some million. It's just not a venture scale exit. It's an amazing exit for, if there was no venture capital involved. Simplecast, one of our competitors, sold for 28 million. Again, that's not a great venture scale exit. It's relatively small when it comes to venture-backed startups. So I'm not convinced the money's good for podcasting. I wonder what's going to happen if all of these, Spotify and even Apple now and VC companies, when they discover that maybe they've overcapitalized in podcasting and there's actually nothing here, and they take all their money and go home, all those creators that were depending on that money, all of the networks, all of the, platforms, it's no fun when a bunch of the money evaporates overnight. So I'm somewhat concerned about it. I think podcasting is a great category. I love it a lot. And I'm worried that, the big money is going to ruin it. I think last year, podcasting got to $1 billion in ad revenue. That was for the entire category. $1 billion in ad revenue for the entire category. Podcasting is tiny compared to radio, compared to print, compared to online advertising, compared to video advertising. It's just so small. And so it doesn't make sense to invest that kind of money in a category that's this tiny. I think it's going to grow, but it's never going to be 100x that, at least not anytime soon.
Yeah, I think I also agree that it's not venture scale, but needs to see where it pans out. And what are some of the analytics one should look at when people are trying to see if the podcast is growing, since your company is also into providing analytics.
Yeah, I can tell you what I look at. We provide an estimated average number of subscribers, and usually most shows will kind of settle into a number. And I think for the podcast I do with John, it's 1,500 estimated subscribers. So those are the people that will download and listen every time we publish a new episode. Now, I also like to, in Transistor, I like to sort by most listens. And, when we do that, we see that Taylor Otwell and Jason Fried, those interviews that we did with them are the top 2 episodes. They have like 12,000 and 8,000 listens each. And that's helpful too. Okay, well, I can see they're very popular and people were looking for them. And it's good to know. Good to know that if we wanted to do that kind of show, we could probably increase our numbers if that was important to us. And then I look at, in Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you can see where people are dropping off in those platforms, and that can be helpful as well. So if people on average are only consuming 50% of the show, you can actually listen and see, where are they actually dropping off here and maybe fixing that. Generally, every show has a downward curve, right? Like every show, there will be more listens at the beginning than the end. But if there's a significant drop in listens, it might be that either the show is too long or you're doing something in that segment that people don't like. So yeah, it makes sense to look at those things. And also actually looking on Transistor, you can see what app people are using to listen. And so, for a tech show, Overcast will probably be quite popular. Well, Overcast has an ad platform where you can advertise your podcast in app to listeners. So if you have a lot of Overcast listeners, makes sense maybe to advertise in the app, and you might get a lot more of those same listeners. So you can use your stats that way as well.
Interesting. And are there any suggestions on how do you get the sponsors for podcasts, or do you think somebody should wait till they have 10,000 downloads a month to look out for sponsors?
No, I think you can get sponsors quite early. I've got an article on this too. I'll give you for your show notes. So at the beginning, when John and I started Transistor, Transistor, the company, wasn't making very much money, but we had this little podcast where we were sharing the journey of building the company, and people wanted to advertise on it. So we started with, it was a $300 a month commitment, and you had to do it at least 2 months. And that got you a little ad spot in 4 episodes a month. So, and at the time, our listener base wasn't massive at all. So I think you can have, 1,000 downloads a month, and or 1,000 downloads per episode, I should say, sorry. And you can get sponsors. You can even have less than that. There's some podcasts on Transistor where they have hundreds of listeners, but they're the right kind of listeners. There's one that's like an energy podcast. So they've got all these oil executives listening. Well, you only need, if people want to reach those folks, then you might not need that many listens to get bigger sponsorship deals. The other thing that John and I did is we had a Patreon for our show, and I've been really surprised. That's consistently made $300 to $400 a month for Transistor. And in the beginning, that was like more than we were making in, monthly revenue from the software. These days, we donate most of that. But at the beginning, it was really helpful. So I think for a lot of podcasters making, we were doing $300 to $1,000 a month in podcast revenue. That's pretty significant, I think, especially if you're doing it on the side. So yeah, you can do it with smaller numbers for sure.
I think that's good to know that you make some money. You don't have to have 10,000 downloads. And
yes,
yeah, that's interesting. And I quickly want to do the top 3. What's your favorite business book?
Oh, it's hard to choose. Getting Real changed my life, but Anything You Want by Derek Sivers is also an incredible read. I highly recommend both those books.
And if you could go back in time when you started Transistor, what is the one thing you would have focused on or done anything differently?
Oh, that is such a great question. I think the investing in really solid distribution channels is really key. So even if there's a lot of momentum in your category, you have to have a way of reaching customers and acquiring customers. And search engine optimization, I think, is going to be big for almost every category of product. How do I start a podcast? Best podcast hosting. So whatever that is for your category, it makes sense to invest in that as strong as you can right from the beginning. And also to build relationships with people who have that kind of traffic and might be able to help you send some of that traffic your way. also very helpful. So I think if I went back in time, we did invest in that pretty early, but I would have even doubled down on it even more. If I could go back in time with the keyword data I have now, that was helpful.
That's a good one. And do you have any favorite online tools? Example, Gmail, Slack, so on.
Yeah. Descript is massive for podcasters. I think Descript's really incredible. And something else we use all the time. Well, actually, I'll say writing an email newsletter has been really big for me. And so I've been with Convertkit for quite a while. And they've been, especially early on when I was building an audience alongside podcasting, I found that the two worked well together, email newsletters and podcasting. And I'd recommend that for folks as well. There's something about speaking out loud that's very, very effective, but also writing is an entirely different experience. And I think also good for just growing as a person, but also eventually connecting with customers.
We'll put that in the show notes. Justin, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about Transistor?
Oh, yeah. So go to transistor.fm. If you go to transistor.fm/start, I have a guide on how to start a podcast. And you can reach me on Twitter. I'm the letter M, the letter I, Justin, M-I, Justin.
We'll put that in the show notes. Justin, thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Yeah, this was great. This was a nice way to spend an afternoon.
Thank you.